Morning folks, welcome to a very damp and mucky Kilmarnock. We're in the home of Mr Frank Beattie, who is a retired journalist and a local historian. So we're just here for a wee interview, general chit chat. Thanks very much for letting us into your home, Frank.
Very welcome.
I hope you're keeping well. So, can you just tell us a wee bit, how you started? You're a retired journalist and you're also an historian. Tell us how you get into the kind of journalism side of things.
I got into journalism by accident because of my interest in history. When I left school, there was no work. I had nothing to do for a short period of time, and I hate having nothing to do. And at the time, there was an appeal in the Standard asking for volunteers to index items that had been in the Kilmarnock Standard, so that future historians could just check the index. Simple. So I was doing that, so I got to know the guys at the Kilmarnock Standard, and eventually I've been saying to them, I've got a great passion for local history and I'm interested in this. Eventually there was a vacancy and they came to me, are you still looking for work? And I said, yes. Would you like to be a journalist? Something I'd never ever thought about, but I just fell into it, backed into it, as they say. And that was me for 40 years with the Kilmarnock Standard Group. Mind you, I was warned, escaping is verboten. And it was.
Before you started your job, was writing a thing that you were interested in?
Yes, I had written a few things just for my own amusement, but not in terms of newspaper style, not in terms of reporting. And I always liked writing. When I was at school, we used to call it composition. I don't know what they call it now, but I used to love doing that. So I had that kind of flair, or if you like, or that interest in writing, and I also had that great passion for local history. That probably came about because in the 1960s, when I was growing up, Kilmarnock was booming, and you couldn't help but be proud of the town. We had B&K carpets sent all over the world, with Saxon shoes, a chain of shops all over the country, and exports all over the world. With Johnny Walker, with Glenfield and Kennedy, with Barclay locomotives. They were all founded in Kilmarnock. And we had Massey Ferguson, which came to Kilmarnock because of the engineering base in the skills and the workers. So Kilmarnock was booming, and all these major industries, they weren't local industries, they were national industries, they were international industries. So you couldn't help but be proud of them. And being proud of them, I thought, I wonder what the background to that business is. Barclays was founded in 1840. Glenfield and Kennedy, the two constituent companies, was back to 1852. And the carpet industry had a history back centuries. The same with shoes. Kilmarnock was a great shoemaking centre. So there was all that history just around, just waiting for you to. You didn't even need to research it; it was there.
I was like everyday items. You say carpet, shoes. People wear shoes, walking carpets every day. But I don't think anybody ever stops to think, well, what is a history of carpets? Because everything has got a history. So your journalism, what kind of, was it general journalism?
Yes, I joined the Kilmarnock Standard as a junior reporter in 1972, and over my career I eventually became a sub-editor, and beyond that I was a sub-editor not just for the Kilmarnock Standard but for a group of newspapers, which doesn't really work terribly well because I think you need to have that local knowledge. If you're checking a page and laying out a page and putting headlines and stories, you need that local information. But that was later. My early career as a journalist, I thoroughly enjoyed it. You didn't need to be told, here's a story, find out what you can about this, here's a press release. You could walk down the street and find a story. I remember doing that on many occasions. I'd walk down the street, meet somebody I know, and you go yap, 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 and you go back with a story. Or you look in a shop window and there's a notice. I remember there was one time the notice was something like lost cat, reward 50 pence. And I just thought, 50 pence? That must be a child's pocket money. Checked it, and it was. So the story in the paper was Jimmy or Jessie, who I can't remember the details now, but whoever it was, had put up their pocket money for the safe return of the cat that had been lost. Nice wee story, tugs at the old heartstrings. And there was another story I love. One day the editor came to me and he said, here's a letter we've just received from somebody who has lost their pet Belgian hare. Give them a ring, find out about it. So I did that, and I wrote the story. In those days it was typewriters, ding. And I read it over before I gave it to the editor, and I thought to myself, the editor's going to ask me, what's a Belgian hare? What's the difference between a Belgian hare and an ordinary hare? And I didn't know, so I thought I'd better find out before I give the story to the editor. So I phoned the local pet shop, and I said to the guy, I'm doing a wee story for the Standard, and can you tell what's the difference between a Belgian hare and an ordinary hare? And he told me a Belgian hare is actually a breed of rabbit, not terribly common. And then he added, it's really strange you asking that because my neighbour has just found one in his garden.
Yeah.
Ding! I thought, where does your neighbour live? And it was just round the corner from where this rabbit had this estate been lost. So I got in touch with them and I managed to pull the whole story together. The rabbit was lost and it's been found, and it was frisky the hare, I remember. And I was just finishing it off and the editor came through to the reporter's room and said, oh, did you speak to the people that lost that rabbit? Oh yes, yes. I also spoke to the person that found it. Oh, eh? What? And he's going, oh, right, phone a photographer. I said, it's done. It's all done. Photographer's organised. So that was a wee story that got onto the front page.
So,
Better luck.
obviously you done a lot of light-hearted stuff,
Yes.
as you say, you walk down the street, you pick up a dozen different stories.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Did you ever cover, Kilmarnock is, now is a relatively quiet town, sort of crime-wise, did you ever cover...
Crime would be covered by you tend not to cover crime in any great detail until a court case. If somebody's been arrested anyway, obviously if there is a crime, you can report it, and the police are looking for witnesses, the police are looking for this, that, the other. Once somebody has been charged, you tend to do nothing until it goes to court. I'm an own court crime reporter at that time, so I was never really involved in that. Occasionally I would go to court to cover. The sheriff court was always much more serious than the district court. District court would be all the trivial things, and the language in the district court is wonderful. So and so is charged with having caused a breach of the peace by shouting and swearing while crossing the road. And I was just shouting and swearing. Come on. And the district court was all the minor things, causing a public nuisance, was peeing against the wall in the dead of night. So what?
But still ends up in court.
Yeah.
So after your journalism, while you were doing your journalism, were you still into history?
Oh yes,
as much?
Very much so.
Because
I could always add to a story. Say there's a local business closing down, and it was quite well known. Even at that stage, I was building up my files, so I could go to my files. Oh, this business founded in 1919, and by a guy that just out the army, and he did this and he did that. So even at that stage, I could add to stories that someone else had written, and I was writing historical features as well. And eventually, it became a regular feature, which at the moment it's been stopped. According to the Kilmarnock Standard, it's been suspended. I suspect that is just because all newspapers just now are feeling the pinch of COVID in terms of falling sales and falling advertising revenue. So perhaps once the COVID is over and newspaper sales and advertising revenue pick up, they'll get back to me and say, can you start doing your history page again?
So you may get back into journalism
in
a way?
Well, in journalism, I still regard myself as a journalist because I am writing on a regular basis for my Facebook page. I've got a Facebook page called The Words and Works of Frank Beattie, and most of it is local history. So I write features and I put in pictures, and there's a tremendous response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Always getting maybe 4 or 5 times a week, somebody will say to me, do you have a picture of, do you have any information about, and I have a huge archive now that covers most streets, churches, factories, shops, schools, people.
Mm-hmm.
So I can usually find something. The latest one I got was, just yesterday, a gentleman contacted me and he said, there's a mound where Rickerton Moss used to be.
Mm-hmm.
He said, did it used to be a crannog? Well, to be honest, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll go to my archive and I'll go, oh right, crannog, right, oh right, what might have been? I don't know, I have to research it yet, but I know the sources that I can use
Mm-hmm.
to research it. So that's something I'll maybe do in the next 2 or 3 days. But pictures, over 40 years or so, the good people of Kilmarnock very often gave me pictures, so that helped build my archive. So today, if somebody asks me for a picture, if I have got a picture, I'll email it to them.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a print, I'll scan it and email it to them. So I just see it as putting something back to the community.
So what kind of sparked your interest in history, you know?
I think it goes back to what I said a few moments ago about Kilmarnock being absolutely booming with nationally important businesses. Probably that. Or maybe it was just stories that you hear. Stories maybe from my mother or my grandmother, or you know, I don't know. I think it has always just been there.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Kilmarnock or Rickerton, to be accurate, was the birthplace of William Wallace. And I don't remember getting taught history about William Wallace at school, but everybody knows the story of William Wallace.
See, William Wallace, we were always told he was born in Elderslie.
Nah. Certainly, I don't think anyone can prove where Wallace was born, but the family had land in both Renfrewshire and in Ayrshire. But
Mm-hmm.
all the stories of Wallace's early exploits are based in Ayrshire. So
Right.
maybe he wasn't born there, but he certainly grew up there.
Ah.
So you can draw the conclusion. But again, it's like everybody wants a piece of it. Everyone wants to say, oh yes, he grew up in my area, he did this in this area. And not just for Wallace, but any local hero.
Aye.
Same with, you know, today, in today's terms, John Lennon, everybody knows somebody that knew John Lennon. There was a programme on TV recently about restoring an old bench that came off the Mersey ferry, and it was from the ship that the Beatles and other groups played in.
Mm-hmm.
So that Beatle link increases the value of the bench. Everybody wants a part of their hero.
Mm-hmm.
It's why we buy souvenirs.
Just to touch on the journalism again before we carry on the history of it. What's the most weirdest story you ever covered?
Oh, I don't know.
You must have got a few.
I must have done, and of course I never kept a cutting of everything that I wrote. There are stories though that depend entirely on luck, like the one about the rabbit. There are other stories that depend entirely on good contacts,
Mm-hmm.
and you never ever break a confidence, because you just don't do that. There was a time I was working for the Irvine Herald, and we printed on a Wednesday, and on a Wednesday morning, chief reporter came in and he said, I've heard that one of the big factories is shutting down, but I don't know which one it is. So we divvied it all up. One person contacted the local council, and somebody else contacted the trades council.
Mm-hmm.
I phoned the local MP, who at the time was David Lambie, and I said, David, look, we've heard that a factory's shutting down. I know you can't tell us what it is, but can you give us a hint? And he said, look, in all honesty, I have not heard that there's a factory shutting down. The only thing that's happening in industrial front is some really good news for Irvine. I said, what's that? Is that somebody coming into Irvine? Is it? Yeah. You know, it's not an expansion, it's somebody moving into Irvine. I said, well, a wee bit more, come on, just a clue, something.
Try to drag it a wee bit.
It's just, it is all very confidential at the moment, but it's a business in the air. It's okay, thanks. So I phoned my colleagues in the Ayrshire Post. Now I didn't want to say to them, there's one of your factories in Irvine is going to open up in Irvine. One of your factories in Ayr is going to open up in Irvine. So I said, if there was a business in Ayr that was in a position to expand, which one would it be? I said, oh, digital. All right, thanks. So I phoned digital. I put on this casual voice and I'm just doing a story about your Irvine plans. I'm not clear, are you moving from Ayr to Irvine or is this an expansion? And the MD, the managing director, paused and says, how the hell did you find out about that? So a bit of luck, and I teased this stuff out of there, and the story was, so journalism is about being innovative, it's about good contacts, a bit of luck, and in the case of my history work, good archives. Because I now throw nothing away. If I walk up the town and somebody gives me a leaflet for a new cafe or a new shop or something, I archive that. Because so often you walk up the street and there's new shops open somewhere and you think, what was there before? What was there last week?
I've done
can't
that
remember.
myself. I've done that myself. You walk in the street and a new shop open and you know, it just pops out of your head, but you know, what was that previously?
You yourself asked me about a building in London Road. So now it's been various guises as a restaurant, and I thought, well, there must be more to it before it was a restaurant, and I looked it out for you, and for many years it was occupied by an architect, and before that a guy that ran an ironmongery business. So the information is there in books, in directories, in all sorts of sources, and it's quite interesting just pulling some heads. Oh right, so he was connected to that. He lived there. He had a shop in that street, and it all ties in together.
Because that location we're talking about, I used to work in three failed businesses. You know, just it lasted maybe 6 months to a year, and then just done basically overnight. And so that struck me as strange. And there was stories going about, as you get everywhere, the building's cursed, the land's cursed, the building's haunted, and so that's why I was curious, because I tried to find out stuff, and I suppose with yourself, you know, you've been doing it a long time, you know where.
I know where to look for information.
You know, whereas I'll Google it, and if I can't find it in Google, I'll give up.
Well, the thing about my archive is I've been building on it for years and years and years, and I don't dismiss anything. And inevitably in my archive, and this is what interests you and your viewers, inevitably I've picked up stories about witchcraft, I've picked up stories about ghosts. I'm quite sure if I went into my archive and searched, I could find a story about a vampire. You know, so I dismiss nothing. I keep an open mind. A lot of your viewers will be familiar with the 14 Times, which I love. I don't accept a lot of the things that they say, but it's great for inspiration if you're doing some writing. But I take the same view. It's not for me to say, that story's a load of rubbish, I'm not going to include it. I'll take anything, it'll be in the archive, and it's of interest to somebody. Even if, in the case of the building we're talking about, a new owner comes in and he says, I'm looking for some of the history of this, and you say, well, there are stories about a haunting or spirits or something. Well, that's of interest. And without looking at it too deeply, people love these stories. And it takes someone like yourself or others to research it thoroughly and say, well, yes, this is the case, or no, maybe it was something else. It's not for me to do that. Me to collect the stories. And there are stories about the Palace Theatre, the Dick Institute, Dean Castle, the Cemetery Gatehouse, Cessnock Castle, Dundonald Castle. There are stories all around town of strange happenings. Now, my belief is that a lot of it is in the mind, because the first thing the brain does when it gets information, and that information might be a smell, it might be a sound, it might be something you see. First thing the brain does, what is it? It's a person. What's the face? Who is it? And the brain does that almost instantly. So I think you get a smell in the brain saying, what smell is that? Oh, that's odd here. There's a story about the Dick Institute where odd smells have occasionally occurred. But was that an accurate smell? Was that the brain of somebody there said, that smells like?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it ties into the past. There was a story at the Dick Institute of a member of staff seeing rows of beds and smelling the smell of a hospital. What was it, germaline or antiseptic?
That was germaline, yeah.
Antiseptic, that sort of thing. Well, the Dick Institute was used as a hospital at the time of the First World War. So is there that thin veil between the physical world and the past? I don't know, it's not for me to say. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to collect the story and leave it for others to investigate. Mm-hmm. Dean Castle has stories of, one that is not widely known is there's no clock on display, and the story was that occasionally the door would swing open for no reason.
Yeah.
There's no draft, no change in temperature. Why would that happen? Is that just the temperature in the wood of that door changing and the door swinging open, or is it something else? There's stories of the old Kilmarnock Infirmary. There's stories about Era Council House, I think in Shortleys. I don't know what street number it was. The buddy that gave me the story originally didn't tell me. She claims to have seen spectral monks.
Yeah.
Personally, I only ever see spirits after I've been drinking spirits. I'm not very perceptive, but I do accept there are people who are sensitive to things, and if that is interpreted as a vision or a sound, so be it. I am well aware that everybody's range of hearing is different, and some people might hear a higher frequency that I don't hear. Mm-hmm. If I don't have my hearing aids in, my range of hearing is the frequency shrinks.
Yeah.
I only know that because talking to friends, and they say, "Oh, what's that high pitched thing? Oh, it's an alarm." I can't hear it. Mm-hmm. But if I've got my hearing aids in, I would hear it.
Different people.
Different people. They perceive things differently, not just hearing. How do I know if I look at that tablecloth, and say, oh, that's a red tablecloth? How do I know you see the same shade of red that I see?
Yeah.
We don't. Everybody perceives things slightly differently. So perhaps there's something in there that helps to explain some of the stories that people tell.
You see, I pick up things, not all the time. I picked up on spirits. There's a group in Wales that, we're quite close to, and they'll post pictures up. They never ever put locations up, but I'll look at pictures and I'll give them feedback in the pictures. I've never ever claimed to be a medium. Yeah. I think once you call yourself a medium, you're tagged. Yeah. Everybody can, they expect great things. It doesn't happen all the time. It can go for weeks, and I don't pick up on anything, and then I'll pick up. It could be you feel that somebody standing beside me, and that's it. As you say, some people can pick up, maybe spirits or smell. I happened yesterday when I picked Sarah up at her mum's. I was outside in the car, and for a few minutes I get a strong smell of bleach.
Right. Okay.
And I said to Sarah, I can smell bleach. Now I was in the middle of the street. Yeah. And Sarah says, "Is it no my hand sanitizer?" I thought, no, I can smell bleach, but there was nowhere it could have came from. I'm not saying it's paranormal or anything, but sometimes you will, you can get it in your head.
I think the brain works faster than we think. There was one time I was driving from South Ayrshire somewhere back to Kilmarnock, and I was approaching Sandiford roundabout, and at that point I was aware there was a 747 coming into land. Not just a big jet, but 747 is a very distinctive shape. I didn't look at it, but I was aware that it was coming into land. I've seen it many times. The brain sees something and I think size, shape, angle. It's a 747 coming into land. Well, that 747 did a 90-degree turn along, so I was facing directly, and then it dispersed. It was a flock of birds.
Right.
Now, that just tells me that I didn't look at it, I was aware of a shape there, and my brain is immediately saying, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
Probably goes back to the time when we were living in forests, and is that dangerous? Mm-hmm. So that's probably where that comes from, but what is it? It's a 747. No, it's not. But having said that, and having also said that I have a rational sort of try and scientific explanation for most things, there was one time I had a dream. It was back in the days when I was at school, and that was the Jimmy Hamilton. And every morning I would meet one of my friends at the corner and we'd walk to school together. We would stand there for a few minutes, and if the other one of us wasn't there, we would just walk on. So I dreamt that I was arriving at school, and I looked across the road, away from where we would normally be, and there was my friend standing talking to the lollipop man. And when I woke up, I thought, I saw it. Doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
But next morning, my friend wasn't where we usually meet. I walked on to school, and there he was, across the road, talking to the lollipop man, exactly as I had dreamt it. And nobody on this earth is ever going to persuade me that I dreamt it after.
You
I dreamt it
before.
and then the event happened. And ever since I've been thinking, why can't I dream of 6 numbers for the lottery? Something useful.
I think a lot of people would like that, as you say. I mean, you get a lot of fortune tellers nowadays, and I think that's probably one of the most common questions, what's this week's lottery numbers. So how far back, history-wise, do you go?
I'll go right back, because everything has a cause and effect, so I can go back. People often ask me, when did Kilmarnock get founded as a town? And I can only say, well, the name comes from St. Marnock. Mm-hmm. Therefore, Kilmarnock was founded in the Christian era. In fact, it wasn't founded by St. Marnock, but the town or the village was created around a church that was dedicated to the memory of St. Marnock. And it would be a very small community at that time, and it's very early on in the Christian era. And if you look at a map, we know the Romans were at Loudon Hill, we know they were at Irvine, we know they were at Ayr, and we know they were in Glasgow. And if you draw a line from Ayr to the Glasgow Cathedral, thereabouts, and a line from Irvine to Loudon Hill, where do they cross? They cross where Kilmarnock is.
Okay.
And it's my belief, there's no archaeological evidence to support this, but I think that there was an ancient crossroads there. So where do you build a church? On a crossroads. Today, where do you build your McDonald's or your shopping, your petrol stations? At a big roundabout. You have your service station or your shops and things. Mm-hmm. It's the same type of thing, because instead of having the possibility of one flow of people, you've got 2 intersecting. So I think that's where the church was built. Mm-hmm. And the church would have its own farm at the time. It would have so it would grow from that, and gradually, people would want buried next to the church, so the church used a little land round about there, and of course it was beside a river, and so I think that is a possibility for the very earliest days of Kilmarnock. And of course at that time, Riccarton was a separate parish. Riccarton hadn't been absorbed into Kilmarnock at that time. There is some archaeological evidence of a Roman road between Loudon Hill and Irvine. And in the Irvine Valley, it would be the high road. You don't build a road in the valley if you're vulnerable to attack, so you build it on the high ground. There is some evidence of a Roman road. So I go right back. And my interest beyond Kilmarnock is, well, what was there before. Where was Scotland? You go into geological times, Scotland, you can trace, Scotland is geologically different from England, and the two came together. And before that, you can go right back and start thinking, well, it all started with a big bang.
Yeah, you can go back to the same other thing on Edinburgh a few weeks ago on their Facebook page with Edinburgh Castle, and if you back you gather the castle, excuse me, the first castle dates back to the 11th century, but then I started thinking, well, what was there before it? As it always, because it's obviously built on a volcanic rock.
Yeah.
So what was there, prior to the castle? And it turns out that they have found evidence dating back to the Iron Age that there was, some kind of human occupation where Edinburgh Castle sits just now.
Yeah. So going back to the point, I don't have a cut-off point. So I'll gather anything that is of local interest, and it's largely Kilmarnock, but with Kilmarnock you've got to include Riccarton, you've got to include Hurlford and Cross, and if I've got information, if I've been doing a bit of writing and I write a wee bit about Girvan or Largs or whatever, I'll include that as well. Of course, Largs is tied up with Kilmarnock as well, because at the Battle of Largs in 1263, Robert Boyd distinguished himself at Goldberry Hill, and he was given large areas of land at what is now Kilmarnock. And of course, the Boyd family adopted the motto as Goldberry. That comes from the Battle of Largs. So you can look at it and say, well, this happened because of that. And we've still got a pub called the Goldberry. The Kilmarnock Academy magazine was called the Goldberry. So these things can be traced back and back and back.
It's not just you just say there's a pub called the Goldberry. It's not just a random name.
That's right.
There is history even behind the name of the pub. We used to live in Goldberry Avenue over in Shortleys, so no doubt that's where that came from. You mentioned briefly, Ella, about witchcraft. Obviously, going back 15th, 16th, 17th century, witchcraft was I'm not saying it's new today, but it was more like the witchcraft, witch trials and what have you. What's kind of like Ayrshires?
Well, there are a few stories of witchcraft from Kilmarnock and Ayr and Irvine. Not a lot, but I have formed my own theory about the witchcraft craze, or the witch hunting craze, and I think it was back to, well, when people were frightened of magic, they didn't understand it, it went against their religious beliefs. And of course they didn't have Google to say, well, we'll research this. They were frightened of old women who were often very wise and knew what herbs to mix to make medicines. They were frightened of someone that looked a wee bit different. So if you had a couple of pimples in your face, ooh, witchcraft.
Or a birthmark.
But I think a lot of the mass hysteria possibly came from a substance called ergot, which is a fungus which grew in wheat, and in a very mild form, it can cause hallucinations, and it can cause mass hysteria. Because once one person says, "Oh, there were witches there," their neighbours believe it, because they don't have an alternative belief. And even if, as most people would be very religious at the time, the Bible says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." So that's where they came to, well, we've got to kill these bloody old women. And very often I think the old women were probably smarter than the men. And sometimes it may well have been a case of exploiting power. We have the power to condemn you to death. And of course what they did to women accused of witchcraft was absolutely appalling.
It was quite horrendous.
Put them in the pond. If they drowned, they were innocent. If they came out, they were guilty, so they were hanged or burned. I mean, it's like cracking eggs. Crack. That's a rotten one. That one was okay. Well, that was okay at all.
I think once the finger was pointed at you, you know,
Yeah.
you're a witch
Yeah.
or she's a witch,
Yeah.
you were basically done for.
And of course, they had no concept of meteorology, so bad weather must have been caused by somebody.
Mm-hmm.
The crops failed, so somebody must be responsible. And I'm glad we live in a more enlightened, well, I say a slightly more enlightened age, where we have a better understanding of why the weather does what it does, and
Mm-hmm.
why an eclipse happens, and the things that were at one time just dismissed as witchcraft.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, you take, like, say, the Pendle witch trials,
Yeah.
1612, it all kicked off because a peddler, you know, he met a young girl, Alice, and, you know, he fell ill. Turned out, you know, it was a stroke.
Yeah.
Obviously back then,
Yeah.
nobody had any idea what a stroke was,
Yeah.
you know. And so as far as he was concerned, he fell out with this young girl, and so she'd cursed him.
Yeah.
But the guy just basically had a stroke.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you know, the other side of Pendle is that people are saying that it was a good way of getting rid of the competition, or if you wanted somebody's fields?
Yeah, well, I'm sure there was that. There is a story from Ayrshire's history about the farm of Beanscroft.
Mm-hmm.
Beanscroft is out the Grassrars Road, and the story was that it was haunted, and it was investigated, and it was found over checking the evidence that this rope's been cut, or this has been done, or the animals were loose, not because of a devil.
Mm-hmm.
It was called the Beanscroft Devil, and a couple of brave souls decided to stay there overnight, and it was the son who was trying to drive his father out the farm so he would inherit the farm. But that goes back, I think, was it end of the 18th century, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows that there was the beginning of proper investigation. You don't just say, oh, it was a devil, it was a ghost, it was a witch, it was a... So, you know, but it's a great story to tell now, especially with the explanation. But it's interesting that a lot of stories change over time. You know, the type of story changes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated by old fairy stories. We still have the expression, he's away with the fairies. People were abducted by fairies. Today, people are abducted allegedly by aliens.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories are so similar. The loss of time, the love for entertainment, or there's also elements in ancient stories of being abducted by aliens and today's stories of being abducted by aliens. Now, does that mean that the interpretation has changed as our scientific understanding has changed? Or is there something deeper in our psyche that thinks, maybe with some people, I have a dull, boring life, I wish something would happen, and maybe they create something in their mind. I don't know, but I think it's something that's worth investigating. I think we need to look a lot more at how the human mind works when we deal with all sorts of things.
What about something I never hear you down here? So I've been living in Kilmarnock for 5 years now. You know, you hear it quite a bit, like say Pendle, Edinburgh, places like that, about satanic worship. You know, it's something that I've never ever heard. I'm not saying there isn't any, but it's just...
I haven't heard anything like that for this area. There are stories, of course, stories about the devil that can be dismissed as stories told for a particular reason. So there's one story about the laird of Rowallan Castle having invited friends to play cards with him, but there was a storm that night, and he stomped about the castle in bad mood, saying he would even play cards with the devil, and of course the devil appeared. Not that the laird knew that at the time, and they played cards, and the story was that when the devil was recognised, he stormed out, and his tail hit one of the stone slabs, one of the stone steps in front of the castle, and cracked it. and that crack is still pointed out today. But you can say, oh, that is a story, perhaps told to young children living in the castle over the years, sitting round the fire, saying, well, have you noticed the crack in the step at the front? That's because. So we all love a story. But as for any form of devil worship, I don't know. I could check the archive, but I really can't think of anything that comes into that.
We were talking about the paranormal, and we mentioned the Dick Institute, the Palace Theatre, Dean Castle, and various other locations. What's your view on the kind of paranormal side? Obviously, there's numerous occasions, locations. Sorry.
I'm very cynical, and I like kind of proof rather than just accept what someone says. I tend to believe that when you're dead, and that is it.
Mm-hmm.
It's Wormfest or whatever. But there are so many stories that I cannot simply dismiss the idea of some form of spirit within you. I think when you're dead, but I think you're in a different sort of a context spirit. Your spirit lives within other people, within their memories of you.
Mm-hmm.
But there are cases of people perceiving something. Maybe it's a sixth sense, maybe it's an unnamed sense, that somebody's in danger, and I don't know, they seem to be sensitive to something. Whether that is spirit world or whether that is a sense that we have, I don't know. I'm not willing to dismiss things like that. I'd like to keep an open mind, but I do tend to think in terms of what is the simplest scientific explanation, and I think a lot of it has to do with the way the brain works, the way the brain processes information. I mean, if I draw a circle, I put two dots and a wee line and a wee line, I say, what is that? You say, oh, that's a smiley face.
It's a face, yeah.
No, it's not. It doesn't look anything like a face. You compare it with a real face, but the brain is saying, what is it? And the brain says, okay, that is a representation of a face. So what happens when the brain comes up with something is it doesn't understand. Maybe there is something there, I don't know. I say, I'm just not willing to dismiss stories like that, and I certainly wouldn't. They used to say, don't laugh at the witch doctor. I wouldn't laugh at somebody that has got let's say a perception that I don't have. Well, I wouldn't laugh at that or dismiss that.
So you get kind of, you got your belief, but you also, that's something similar to me. I believe in the paranormal, but at the other side of the coin is I'm open-minded, as I said earlier on. I'm not going to say 100% everything is paranormal.
Yeah.
There's a rational explanation for it. Sometimes
at one time, everything was paranormal. We touched on witchcraft. We touched on things that people didn't understand, and it was either God or spirits or the devil or whatever. And that would be bad weather. It would be there have been occasions in Kilmarnock where an earthquake has been felt. Not devastating earthquakes at level 7, but just enough to cause a rattle. At one time, people didn't really understand what was causing that. Today, we do understand earthquakes. We do understand sailors coming back with stories about mountains that spit fire. Oh, come on. But now we understand that. And we know why it happens and how it happens. Maybe can't predict it, but we know how it happens and why. At one time, people were a bit puzzled by the moon. Why does the moon change its shape? Well, we know now. And I think there are parallels right throughout history where something that was mysterious, diseases, illness, have been understood, and we extend the boundaries of human knowledge time and time again. Perhaps in a few years people will be able to say this form of paranormal was because, or this is something else. And I don't think there is a simple shoebox of ghosts. I think they overlap our senses. I think the paranormal covers ghosts that might be poltergeists, or something that might, we've touched on smells or sounds, and I think all the senses kind of intermix, and at all sorts of different levels there might well be something that is there that we don't understand yet. I think scientists are too quick to dismiss things saying, oh, we know it all, we understand it all. And then they talk about quantum physics and quantum mechanics. What? That doesn't match our perception of our reality. But at the terms of the very, very small, there is a different level of perception. So maybe there is levels where the reality touches. We're talking very close to Halloween, and in the Celtic tradition, Halloween was, it's a circle. The seasons are a circle, and New Year is only New Year because we've decided that is New Year. In the Celtic tradition, New Year was the end of October, and it was the day or the night when the Pleiades were directly overhead. And the Pleiades are important in many cultures because it was used as an eye test. Because if you look at the Pleiades, you might see 5 stars, you might see 7, depending on how good your eyesight was.
Right.
And if you could, the more stars you could see, the better your eyesight. And the better your eyesight, the more likely you are to be the lookout on the castle or wherever, watching out for potential enemies.
Right.
So the Pleiades were important, and in the Celtic tradition, they believed that at that particular night, that was when the veil between the old world of spirits and the new world of the living was at its thinnest, and the spirits could move into the realm of the living. So certain traditions grew up. One was that you would leave your back door open. You would leave food out, nuts and fruit. And then there was a tradition that perhaps we wanted to confuse the spirits, so we would dress up in different clothes. So you see the traditions of Halloween growing from that. And some of the other traditions of setting bonfires, well, you do that this time of year because that's when there's all this dry rubbish from dead leaves and twigs and whatnot. So build a bonfire, set it alight. And there are other traditions that match New Year. So New Year was a festival that existed because, again, the change of the seasons, the change from winter to the start of having shorter nights and longer days again. And a lot of these traditions existed long before the Christian era, and the Christians hijacked a lot of these traditional festivals and absorbed them. I mean, why try and abolish them? That just causes friction. Why not adopt them and grow them? And you find that with a lot of traditions.
Christmas trees as well.
The festival of Saturnalia, the ancient Roman festival of Saturnalia. It was a day when there were no wars. We weren't allowed to fight wars in Saturnalia. You weren't allowed to. I think prisoners were released. You had things like the master and servant would change places. You had an exchange of gifts. And you begin to see a lot of traits of Christmas coming in for Saturnalia. So a lot of the ancient festivals have got fantastic histories which we can see. If you look at Christmas today, everybody loves Christmas trees. That only goes back to the Victorian era. People adopted a Christmas tree because Queen Victoria, who was German, had a Christmas tree, and the Christmas tree was a German tradition.
Was the Christmas trees no go back to when they used to bring a sapling or a tree
There
indoors?
was an element of that, but that grew into the Christmas tree largely because of Queen Victoria. And of course, a lot of our perception of Christmas, particularly the weather, is down to Charles Dickens.
Mm-hmm.
And he was remembering as a child bitterly cold, a really cold winter spell, and he was the one that gave us this perception that Christmas Day is snowy, which it's not.
I think everybody, we've all got that image,
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, 9 times out of 10 every year, my gran would come down,
Yeah.
after in the afternoon, and I always remember a walk. We was standing at the window watching for it because we knew she had another present for us, basically.
Yeah.
And you would see her kind of trudging through the snow.
Yeah.
And that's my kind of memory
Yeah.
of Christmas,
Yeah.
just snow and what have you. But the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 Christmases have been dry, rainy.
Very few Christmases were snowy. But again, this comes down to storytelling. And everybody who's telling a story, even if it's just to your own children or to you're sitting in the pub telling a story, you automatically embellish it a wee bit for the sake of a thrill or a laugh or whatever. And I suppose it goes back to travellers' tales. The old sailors would come in and they'd go to the pub and they'd tell wonderful stories of exotic lands and strange animals and all sorts of things. And they would do that. They'd get the supper, they'd get a pint of mead or ale or whatever. And I think that there is a need for us to tell stories. And then again, the old tribal thing or the extended family, his story. The one that would tell the story of the past glories of the tribe, his story, history.
Mm-hmm.
So storytelling is a big part of history, but even the written record sometimes has to be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best sources of local history is newspaper records. But the newspaper record is someone like myself, a reporter, speaking to somebody, then going back to the office, sort it all out in my mind, sort my notes, and it's then my interpretation of what was said. So that changes slightly perhaps from what was meant by the person telling the story. What the person telling the story might have perceived it differently. And if you want a good example of how things are perceived differently, go to a court, go to the sheriff court and sit through a trial, and the same witnesses are talking about the same event, and it's all slightly different.
There's a slight variation.
Slightly, not just from the point of view, but people will interpret what they see slightly differently, and they'll remember it slightly differently. And that, I think, comes down to another aspect of stories of the paranormal. You've got to think, well, is there a hint here of a thrill? Is there a hint here of... I don't think many stories are told for fraud or just for financial gain. There's some, but I think these are usually weeded out.
Mm-hmm.
But there are stories that someone has maybe misinterpreted the situation. We still get today loads and loads of stories of someone looking up at the night sky and they see a light, so it must be from Mars. No, it doesn't need to be from Mars. It's a light. It could be a satellite caught in a sunbeam.
I think other people maybe tell, as you're saying, stories are told for, money or whatever.
Yeah.
But another reason maybe, it's just my opinion, is that people tell, these stories maybe in the hope that somebody can explain it to them.
Oh yes, there is that. That's what I do. I say, well, I collect all these stories. Oh well, maybe this happened or maybe that happened. And very often, mysteries of ghosts or poltergeists or witchcraft or all these things are mysteries. But a lot of them are mysteries because there's a piece of missing information.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had that piece of information,
the missing link, so to speak,
we would have the story.
That's good. Well, I'll wind up. Time's going to get away from us. But thanks very much for your time, young man.
You're very well.
Young man again.
We'll not shake hands because of the
No, just nod heads.
Nod heads or touch elbows.
Elbow bump.
But the situation, unfortunately, is that we've got to keep social distance and we've got to respect the potential. I get mysteries. This COVID, where did it come from? How is it spread? I mean, are we getting told the whole truth? Is it just...
Who knows, it's day by day basically, I think a week by week.
We've just got to take it day by day and make the most of it. But I'm glad you were able to visit me.
Oh, we're very happy you let us in your home.
I don't see isolation bothers me, because it doesn't. I've made friends with wee green furry men who live in the cupboard under the sink.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to come back again.
Absolutely.
I want to pick your brain a bit more around, so...
Send me an email or a text, and I can look out information about particular instances or buildings or whatever.
That'd be great.
And I can just pull it out my archive.
That's excellent. So thanks very much for watching, folks. Again, thanks very much to Mr. Frank Beattie. You will be seeing him again. Very, very interesting guy. He's got a lot of knowledge up here, which I intend to pick his brain a bit more. So for now, just take care, and wherever you are, stay safe. Bye.
Stay safe.